we got some sad news on Friday. One of the most controversial names in wrestling history, and that is no exaggeration. New Jack passed away on Friday from a heart attack at the age of 58. I just watched his virtual signing for High Spots on their Facebook page like a week ago. They started doing these every week, these virtual signings during the pandemic. So sometimes I'll see that they're live and I'll watch for a little bit. And there was New Jack. He was signing copies of his book and photos and trading cards and turnbuckle pads. And the owner, who's sitting next to him at this table, is telling him bad jokes that the fans submitted to try to get him to laugh. They were trying to get him to crack, and he wasn't laughing because they were pretty bad. I mean, these jokes were horrendous. But he got him on the last one. He said, "What did one butt cheek say to the other? Together, we could stop this crap." And New Jack cracked up at that one. WWE actually put out a statement about his passing, which shocked me. Talking about his career from the USWA to Smoky Mountain to ECW. Not only did they put a statement out on their website, for a guy who never even worked for them, and when you consider his past on top of that, they gave Paul Heyman a few minutes at the end of Talking Smack yesterday to say a few words about New Jack, and he was all choked up, called him the original gangsta. New Jack despised Paul Heyman, hated him with a passion, said that he hoped he died slow. So hearing Heyman be the one to eulogize him was something else. I'm sure New Jack would have had a few words about that. But New Jack's legacy is complicated, right? You cannot ignore all of the bad shit that he did just because he's dead now. He took liberties with people in a business where you're supposed to be able to trust your opponent. But you also can't deny the fact that he was charismatic and he could be very entertaining. He was real. He was as real gets. That could be a good thing in an industry that increasingly feels less and less real, less and less genuine. I mean, think about what we see on television now from one week to the next, and I'm not just talking WWE. How many people can you pick out? You could probably count them on one hand and still have fingers left over. People that when you watch them on television and you hear them cut a promo, come across to you the way that New Jack came across to people in terms of feeling genuine. That you would look at the guy and say, yep, that's pretty much who he is. I bet when the camera goes off, that's probably pretty much how that person is. Like him or not, for better or worse. The guy was the genuine article. But that could also be a very bad thing. New Jack was not somebody to fuck with. Some of the things he did in the ring, he should have gone to jail for. And he almost did. But I remember saying, when his Dark Side of the Ring episode came out and I did that whole review on it, he was way more intelligent than people give him credit for. As batshit crazy as he was not a dumb person. But when you're a child and you watch your father stab your mother 5 times right in front of you, and then another time when she tries to leave the house, your father shoots her in the leg as she tries to leave, you're going to end up being at least a little bit fucked in the head. There's no way around it. He was supposedly a bounty hunter with 2 murders to his name before he even got into pro wrestling. He and his partner Mustafa, they were the gangstas, got a ton of heat in Smoky Mountain Wrestling for exactly the reasons that you would expect. Given where they were working, he knew how to bring out the worst in those fans. When you think of New Jack, you can't not think of the mass transit incident, one of the more infamous incidents in wrestling history. Mass transit is what they called this kid, Eric Kulas. The kid was 17. He claimed he was 21 when he showed up to work an ECW show. Unfortunately for him, he ended up working a tag match against New Jack, who found him in the back to be very disrespectful when he introduced himself and he was asking if he could get some offense in and, could you give me some color during the match? And his quote in the Dark Side special was, "I didn't want to kill him, but I wanted him close to death." He cut this kid's head open so deep, it very nearly became a crime scene. It looked like one. And the blood-curdling screams, the kid's father at ringside, he's only 17. I mean, that's haunting shit. Whether or not you think the kid was in the right or the wrong, that's almost not even the point. Everything about that was just completely disturbing. I just talked about the JYD story in the history segment on last week's podcast, which I have to say, to listen to New Jack tell it in his own words, the man was a great storyteller. I did enjoy watching my fair share of New Jack shoot interviews when I'd go down the shoot interview rabbit hole. I've said before, Kevin Nash and probably New Jack are two of my more favorite shoot interview subjects when it pops up in my recommendeds on YouTube. More often than not, I will click on it to listen to them tell stories. It's very entertaining. Paul Heyman begging New Jack not to beat up Junkyard Dog at the ECW WrestlePalooza show because he still owed $300 to New Jack for some weed that he sold him months or years earlier, whatever it was. And New Jack said, he's gonna pay me back. So he clocked him backstage when he saw him. He never did get his money. JYD died a month later. I know New Jack was still bitter about that. Then there's the Vic Grimes stuff. The two did a balcony dive spot in ECW once. Might have been their Living Dangerously show, where Grimes got cold feet at the last second, didn't want to do it. And they were already up there. And New Jack said, fuck it, we're going. And off they go, and on the way down, Grimes, who was not a small man, landed right on New Jack's head, which cracked his skull. It made him blind in one eye. New Jack claimed he was blind in one eye for the rest of his life. Fast forward a couple of years later in XPW, which is getting the Dark Side of the Ring treatment later this season, they're booked against each other in a scaffold match. And Grimes comes up to him in the back before the match to apologize for what happened at the ECW show, 2 years earlier. New Jack wasn't having it. He wasn't having any of it. He said Grimes never once called to check on him after what happened. So they're up on the scaffold, and he pulls out a taser. New Jack does, and he tases Grimes. Grimes tells him, Jack, I can't feel my legs. And New Jack goes, I shouldn't laugh, because this is one of the scariest things I've ever seen, but again, when I say he's a character, he's a character. And this is quite the quote. He just looks at Grimes and goes, you won't need him. Bombs away. And he proceeds to throw Vic Grimes off the scaffold very nearly to his death. To this day, it is the scariest bump that I have ever seen. I have no idea how Vic Grimes is alive today. Absolutely terrifying. He only missed hitting the floor by about a foot. So again, if you've seen the video, you know what I'm talking about. There were stacks of tables, I think, down below. But the way he threw him, Grimes got tangled up in the ropes. It looked like the ropes were really what broke his fall. If he had just gone straight down to the ground, then he would not be alive. And New Jack was upset because he wanted him to miss the ring and hit the floor. That is what he wanted. And after the match was over, New Jack told Grimes, now we're even. The Gypsy Joe incident, that's another infamous one that there's just no excuse for. And again, if you're going to tell New Jack's story, you have to be fair about it and take the good with the bad. This was very bad. Gypsy Joe was 73 years old at the time. This was at an independent show in 2003. And Joe's whole gimmick was that he's an old man who doesn't feel pain and he just no-sells everything. And he may have made comments before the match about teaching New Jack a thing or two about wrestling a hardcore match. Well, that didn't sit well with New Jack, who starts beating the crap out of him with a barbed wire baseball bat. What he should have done is take that barbed wire bat to that fucking mutant in the audience who kept chanting beat that N-word's ass at him. If you're going to yell the N-word at New Jack or anyone else for that matter, you deserve to have your brains beaten in. But Gypsy Joe was not very happy about it. He kept a knife in his bag from that point on, hoping the New Jack would be booked on the same show with him again, which thankfully he never was. But New Jack spent time in TNA. He spent time in CZW. Not a lot of time, but he was there and obviously worked for tons of independent promotions over the years. I think his last match was actually this year, I believe. I think he may have wrestled over WrestleMania weekend in a tag team match. I believe is in one of the eulogies is what because I was wondering, when was the last time he actually wrestled? Has he wrestled, during the pandemic? And apparently he did no more than maybe a month or two ago. But New Jack never worked for WWE. Not even for those one-night stand reunion shows. They brought almost everybody back. At least the ones that were still alive. But not New Jack. He claimed that he and Mustafa were scheduled to appear on one of the shows where ECW invaded WWE. It may have been the one they did at the Manhattan Center. But they got pulled. And Heyman told them they got pulled because Vince McMahon said he didn't trust him to work with his guys. The only time he even came close to working for WWE, he got booked for a tryout match. And this may have been back in 2005, I think. I'm not sure exactly on the year, but he got booked for a tryout match. It ended up not happening. On his podcast, his very short-lived podcast, New Jack's Safe Space, he said that Dean Malenko told him, because Malenko at the time was an agent for WWE. He said Dean Malenko came over to him and said, Jack, whatever you do, don't speak to Vince McMahon. If you pass him in the hallway, just keep walking. Don't say anything. So, of course, New Jack passes him in the hallway and he says, hey, Vince, how you doing? I'm New Jack. Thanks for the opportunity. And Vince McMahon is like, oh, no problem. You're welcome. Good luck. So then after that, he's thinking, who is that fucking guy who told me not to talk to Vince McMahon? He's going off on Dean Malenko. But later on, he's going over his match with the kid that he was working with, and here's all the stuff we're going to do in the match. The guy's totally on board with it. He said the agent for the match was Arn Anderson. And actually, Arn Anderson and Dean Malenko now are working as agents for AEW, but they were both with WWE at that time. And according to New Jack, I guess it would have been Arn Anderson who went to Vince McMahon and told him about all of the stuff that he overheard that New Jack said he was going to do in his match. And later on, when New Jack walked past the board backstage, he noticed that his name, which was on there previously, had been wiped off. So he went up to Arn and he said, why was my name wiped off the fucking board? And Arn Anderson tells him, whatever, something changed. Go get your money from Pat Patterson and we'll be in touch. So, at least they paid him. He was happy that he at least got his payday that he was promised. He said he went to a seafood bar, went to his hotel, got some sleep, and then he flew back to Atlanta. And so ended New Jack's one and only experience with WWE. Now, there were rumors years ago that the original plan was for New Jack to be revealed as the man who stabbed John Cena instead of Carlito's bodyguard. Remember Jesus? They brought in Aaron Aguilera as his bodyguard who stabbed Cena in a club or something. That was the storyline. That's when Cena was feuding with Carlito for the U.S. title. I don't think there was anything to that. I've never heard New Jack confirm that. I've never heard anybody confirm that. Although it would have been completely believable that New Jack would stab John Cena. I actually think that could have worked. But New Jack is one of those guys where I think he just would have imploded had he gone to WWE. I mean, look at someone like Sandman. Sandman was there for a little while, but, even Sandman didn't last long. Sabu didn't last long. New Jack was on a whole other level. Do you honestly believe that New Jack would have lasted more than a month or two in WWE? It never would have worked. It never would have worked. Certainly not in the PG era. Never would have worked. It's just not a good fit. But in a business full of characters, New Jack was definitely a character. And I think it is appropriate to remember the final parting scene from his Dark Side of the Ring episode when the producer asked him, how do you think a movie based on your life should end? He starts laughing hysterically and he says, it should be him sitting in a wheelchair, snorting coke, getting high as shit, flipping everybody off, saying, "Thank you, bitches." That sounds about right.